In a few of our other videos, I talk about how much a boundary survey should cost and why they cost, what they cost, because they're expensive and a lot of people are surprised by that. And in this video, I want to talk about why we don't compete here at Redefined Horizons to perform boundary surveys based on a low bid. In other words, if you call me and you're trying to get a boundary survey and I can tell from our conversation that you're just trying to hire whatever surveyor gives you the cheapest price, I am not going to be interested in your business. Okay? So why is that? You know, that's a lot of people say, well, hey, that's how the rest of the economy works. You know, Landon, why do you think you're special? Okay, so there's some very good reasons why we don't try and get work based on the cheapest price. But I'm going to talk about one of them in this video that's really important. And the basic reason is, no matter what I do, I will always have competitors that are willing to cut corners on a boundary survey. And there's lots of ways you can do that. So if you put me in a situation where I have to compete on price, I'm never going to win. I'm never going to win because I won't cut corners. I want to do the job the right way. I have legal requirements that I have to follow. I need to follow the law. And I just will always have, there will always be other surveyors that are willing to compromise on their standards, right? There are always surveyors willing to cut corners. And boundary surveying is just one of those things that provides lots of opportunities to do that. So if you're in business as a boundary surveyor and you're trying to do things the right way, you're always going to be more expensive than some of the competition because you're never going to be able to get your prices below the cutthroats and the bottom feeders, right? So what I wanted to do in this video is, because I don't want you to take my word for that. So I want to explain what are some of the ways that bad guys, okay, it could be gals too, but bad guys cut corners on boundary surveys, right? So I want to explain to you some of the shortcuts people take that we don't take. And those shortcuts are why they're giving you a cheaper price for the boundary survey, okay? So I'm going to cover 5 in this video, right? I could easily do a video with 5 more, and I will, okay? But in this video, we're just going to do, these are the first 5 things that popped into my head, ways that I see other boundary surveyors cut corners. Now, there's lots of good boundary surveyors out there, okay? There's lots of bad boundary surveyors out there too. So you need to know who you're hiring, okay? So here's the 5 ways. 5 ways that bad guys cut corners on boundary surveys, okay? Number 1, they do what we call 2 monument tango. So what is 2 monument tango? 2 monument tango is when the surveyor goes out, he finds 2 property corner monuments, and then he just establishes the rest of your property boundary. He retraces the rest of your property boundary just using angles and distance measurements, right? With just those 2 monuments. In other words, he doesn't look for any other property corner monuments. Okay? And that's important because in California law, in Nevada law, the property corner monument in almost all cases controls the actual location of your boundary. So what that means is, if you find a property corner monument and it doesn't line up with where the angles and distances in your deed say it should be, but you don't have evidence of fraud or some other really weird circumstance, then the actual property boundary is going to be at the location of the monument, not where the measurements in the deed say, right? It's confusing. It's the way our legal system works. There's good reasons for it. So if you got a surveyor just doing 2 monument tango, he's not going to know that. She's not going to know that there was a conflict between the monument and the measurements in the deed, right? You have to look for each and every property corner monument set to mark the boundary of the parcel that you're surveying. If you don't do that, you're taking a shortcut. And this shortcut happens so often, we actually have a name for it. 2 monument tango, right? Because a lot of surveyors do it. So that's shortcut number 1, 2 monument tango. That's a surveyor that is just using the first 2 monuments he finds to do the rest of the survey. He's not looking for monuments at each corner, okay? Shortcut number 2, the surveyor doesn't do a good review of the deed for the parcel that he's surveying, right? So in many cases, you'll have a parcel that has been surveyed in the past, and what some surveyors will do, they'll just go get that last survey, and they won't actually look at what's in the deed. And now that's important because what's in the deed is what you actually bought, right? The deed is a legal document that describes the type of rights that you got to the property and the location of those rights. Okay? And in most cases, the last survey doesn't overrule the deed. It might clarify the deed, but it can't change what's in the deed. That's part of how our legal system is set up. And your deed is also what you got title insurance on, right? So there's a lot of really important reasons why the boundary surveyor needs to be carefully looking at your deed, right? He needs to look at how it's described. Are there potential conflicts or problems in it? Are there exceptions and reservations in it? Are there easement rights described in it? Does the description in the deed match recent surveys? Does it match the information that's in the tax assessment records? Does it match the information that's in the title report, if there is one, land title report? So yeah, he needs to be looking. He needs to carefully study the deed that you use to acquire the property. And a lot of guys don't do that. They just grab the last survey that's on record and they just roll with it. Okay, they don't spend a lot of time looking at the deed. Okay, shortcut number 3 is the surveyor doesn't review any of the what we call the adjoiner deeds. That's the deeds for the parcels that are next to yours, that touch and are next to your parcel. We call those adjoiners. Okay, so to do a proper job of boundary surveying in our legal system, the surveyor has to study not only your deed, but the deed of all the parcels that touch your parcel, as a general rule. Okay, so that's a lot of work, right? So if a surveyor is skipping that step, he or she is saving a lot of money, right? But they're not doing a proper job. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because the deed for the subject parcel, for your parcel, may have information that conflicts with the deed next door, one of the adjoiners. And so then you have to figure out, what do you do with that conflict? Which deed controls? And surveyors have a whole set of legal principles and rules that we have to follow. Try and figure that out, right? But if you don't check the adjoiner deeds, you don't know if there's a conflict, right? So that's another shortcut that a lot of bad guys take. Shortcut number 4 is bad surveyors don't check for conflicts in measurements, adjacent measurements. So if you've got your parcel was surveyed and then the parcel next door was surveyed, you should be able to look at that common boundary they share and compare the measurements, right? A lot of surveyors don't do that. They just grab the most recent survey of the parcel that they're surveying and they don't look at the surveys next door. That's important though. You want to understand if the surveys next door show a conflict with the parcel that you're surveying, but that's a shortcut a lot of people take. Number 5, last one here, the surveyor doesn't check for what we call gaps or overlaps. Okay, and so what you have to do as a surveyor when you're to properly execute a boundary survey is you have to survey your parcel based on the deed, and then you essentially, to some extent, have to survey the neighboring parcels. So it could be the adjoiners, the ones that are right next door. Sometimes you even have to go one other step over. Right? So you got to survey some of the next door neighbor's parcel. Then you got to go one more parcel over and survey that neighbor's parcel, right? To be able to determine if there are going to be conflicts, what we call gaps or overlaps, okay, in the property records that could potentially cause a problem, right? And that is a step that a lot of bad surveyors just don't take, right? Not only are they not looking at the adjoiner deeds, they're not checking the adjoiners or the other parcels in the vicinity. They're not checking those parcels for gaps or overlaps with the parcel that they're surveying. That's really important, can cause huge problems, okay? Huge boundary and land title problems. So, and we have a word for the proper way to do that. We call it, well, we have a phrase, we call it the resolved boundary matrix. Okay, so you have to go look at the matrix of parcels that you need to survey to properly establish the boundaries of your parcel. So when you hire a surveyor to do a boundary survey, they're not just surveying your parcel. They're surveying the neighbors' parcels too. All of your neighbors, if they're doing the job right. Okay, and so you can see now why sometimes people will find that there's a difference of a multiplier of 2 or 3 between my price and the price of the cheapest guy, right? So the cheapest guy says, I tell him, hey, your survey is going to be $6,000 or $8,000, and the cheapest guy says it's going to be $1,500, right? Well, yeah, because he's taken all these shortcuts, right? There's a huge difference in the amount of work between doing something half-baked and doing something the right way when it comes to boundary surveying. And that's why we don't compete on price. I am not ever going to take those shortcuts, and I'll never be able to compete with the guys that do take those shortcuts, and I'm never going to be able to get rid of the guys that take the shortcuts, right? So I have to compete based on a quality job delivered at a reasonable price in a reasonable period of time, and I have to compete with my reputation for doing good work. And that's the people that hire me and my team. They hire us because we do good work. They don't hire us because we're the cheapest, because in order to be the cheapest, I would have to take these same 5 shortcuts, and I'm not willing to do that, right? So spend your money wisely. Don't hire the cheapest boundary surveyor you can find, right? Hire a reputable surveyor that will do your work at a reasonable price, and you can ask the surveyor if he's going to do these things. Just ask him or her. Just say, hey, I watched Landon's video. Are you going to do all 5 of these things? Make them tell you they're going to do it, right? So there you go. Knowledge is power. Don't be cheap. Don't hire a surveyor that's going to take shortcuts on your boundary survey.